Buenas tardes a todos in Monterrey. I'll do this in English because there's probably um, a lot of people from different countries here, so I think it'd be fair to do that in English. Thanks, Jorge, for allowing me to do this. I'm a member of the Brazilian several Brazilian Graphic Designers Association, but on the last, I would say, 5 years I've been over 5 years actually. It's almost 10 years. I've been researching aspects of graphic design within comics, and this was something that it started way back there in my graduation work, in my graduation project back in the 1990s. So some 30 years ago, or yeah, 25, 30 years ago. And it's and then I'm later on I went into my master's, where I studied logos related to comic books. And I'm here in the Netherlands doing a PhD at Tilburg University, um, on comic book covers. And I'm going to share with you a few things that I've sort of uh, I've been looking into it, and just in case no one here knows what comic books are or comics are. Um, Comics, as we know, it's originated from political cartoons that had been in newspapers, and that soon, eventually started putting sequence. So it's called also una narrativa secuencial, and this you can see this been this has 200 years pretty much. And and then the comic strips, they used to be, before the 1930s, always in the paper. So they would come either by in the daily papers, in the strips, and in supplements that would come out once a week. And then in 1933, um, although you had before, eventually, like, people that collected some strips and published them as books to give away. But in 1933, they someone realized that they could fold the supplements, which was a tabloid side, in half, and that would be more sturdy and would come a what they called a comic book. It would become, because it took the aspect of a codex more than a newspaper, so it would be a book. And since the strips, they were humor strips, they were comics, right? And so this is how comic books started. Um, it was pretty much a big innovation at the time, because people didn't pay for comics. They would just come free in newspaper. And the first comics, they were just reprints of comic strips that appeared on the newspapers, or sometimes were unused. Um, and then but soon they started to do comics, um, for the especially for the comic books, right? Which, in a way, in due time, sort of revolutionized the medium, right? Because then you didn't only have the strips, you had the turning pages, you had the area to do that, you had timing. So you had that. So very soon, you had tons of comic books in the newsstands, right? And the initially, the comic books, sorry, they took they were influenced by three different medias of the time. Um, the first one was obviously the newspaper strips, right, where you got the most of the characters, like Disney, like Mickey Mouse, or cartoons and adventure strips like Buck Rogers, Flash, and so on, and the animation industry, because this was in the 30s, and in the 1920s you had the Walt Disney Studio, had what would become the Warner Brothers Studio. So these characters, they were the first ones that were even transposed to the comics, or copied or inspired characters that started on the comic books. And the third medium was the pulp magazines, which have this name because they were printed in a very cheap paper, the pulp paper, um, the pulp fiction, and which presented uh, crime, war stories, adventure, science fiction stories, and had this beautifully painted covers with a teaser, with a trailer of what was going inside in the text. They were not pictures, they you had a few illustrations inside, but mostly the covers, um, they needed to convey the message of was inside. So um, the first publishers that got interested in the comic books were actually the pulp magazine publishers, because they already had the means of production, they already knew the printers, they already knew illustrators, artists, they had the distribution. And if you added, you another another product, that would be more oriented for children, it would make their lives easier, because distribution in the 1930s, you had the newsstands, but you had a lot of supermarkets and drugstores. So sometimes these places, they didn't really want to offer a crime or a horror story to their customers. So they would just go and say, oh, but we do have things for children too, and that's so they got interested in that. And soon they took over the business, they dominated the comic book industry. And you can see that the first covers sort of emulated the aspects of the pulp fiction. They drew from their genre, from uh, their formats, right, and from the way that they presented imagery on the cover, right. And then in 1938, there was a different genre that emerged in comic books, that combine aspects from the adventure genre, the crime genre, and the science fiction, which was the superhero, that had the same initiative as heroes like Zorro did, with a secret identity, that fought crime in an urban place like The Shadow, or like other detective crime stories, and science fiction, that was someone from outer space that came to a different planet, and in that planet could do different things, could fly, could jump, could run, could be faster, right. So soon the superhero genre became a big hit, and um, just generated a lot of imitations of Superman, both um, conceptually and visually. And not only I'm not only talking about the uniforms, or the secret identity or anything, but because these things they actually existed before Superman and the superhero. But in they by imitation and by repetition, you started the genre, right. And the comics suddenly, I mean, soon, just took all over the newsstands until this day, if we do still have newsstands wherever we have them, right. um, and you could see that the cover was pretty much the only sort of communication piece, the only sort of advertising that you had for that product in the point of purchase, which would be back then the newsstands, or until uh, 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 a couple decades ago, the newsstands. And you could see that, for example, the logo is a very important piece of that communication system, because depending on how you stack them on the stands, you only see the logo, you don't see the image, right? So there's this for starting. And you also have, how they are organized. It could be stacked horizontally, or they could be stacked vertically or horizontally. So you would only see the left part of the comics. Um, in the 1970s, there was the development of what we know today as the direct market, basically comic shops, which is our specialty stores that just have comics. And in those places, you could, and until this day, you have a better way of displaying the covers. But again, now we don't have covers on top of each other. Except if they're old comics that they're in boxes. And if you go into the digital age, the last 20 years, this is how a newsstand or a comic shop is. So you do have the entire cover showing up, right? And there was a big evolution regarding the ergonomy, regarding how these things are presented. And I selected a few things here just to show a little bit, very briefly, what I'm talking about. Um, I took 9 Action Comics, which was the first superhero comic book existed. I took 9 covers, one from each decade since the 1940s, always in November, just just to show, just to comment a little bit. And if you look at the first image, you see it's the first cover is basically still a pulp magazine. You have a guy jumping, catching bad guys. You have some sort of slogan, world largest selling comic magazine. You have the logo, which needs to be repeated, because covers, they have elements of identification and differentiation. So the logo is how you call the magazine. I want Action Comics. I want Vogue. I want Cosmopolitan. I want Batman. So it's how you recognize, namely, the magazine. And you can see that on the top corner, the left side, you have a little picture of Superman, right, breaking chains, because this was the part that would never be covered. They would never, if you're stacking it horizontally, you would still see that. If you start it sideways, that would be still showing. So even if you don't read Action Comics, and sometimes, like in this 1941 cover, we have Superman over the logo, you still know it's a Superman book. Um, you have the price, you have the issue number, you have a date, and you have the DC logo, um, which was something that didn't exist in the first magazines. If we go back to the first Action Comics cover, you don't have any indication of the publisher, right? And then we move 10 years later, you still have the logo, Action Comics, but now it's sort of a downsized a little bit. It's moved to the left so we can have a better visualization. You have the DC logo that moved to the left top corner, so you'd always see this. And even though by that time you have not only the imagery, but you have some sort of text with it, right? Trying to explain a little bit more of the story. Um, it's not just an image that you're going to be intrigued or excited to buy. No, you had to offer a little bit more, right? And you can see that above the logo, you do have some that space that in the previous one used to show just a slogan. It's also telling about something else that it's inside the magazine, right? Um, and 30 years later, oh, sorry, and 10 years later, so, in this different 30s, we noticed that the comic book, it's still the same price, right? Still 10 cents. So there's no inflation. You have the logo is now sort of centered. 10 cents becomes bigger and back on the left side because after 30 years without changing the price, this is something that, it might be a way to differentiate the product, say, hey, this is cheap, buy it. And we have on the right corner, on the right side of the top corner, you have the comics code, which was a sort of it was a seal of approved by the publishers industry that started in the 1950s, when you had a big fuss about horror comics and crime comics. So this means like this is acceptable for children, right? And you're gonna see this logo. It's this little seal. It's gonna be there for a while. And in terms of imagery, you see that there's also now in the 60s, you have um, there's not only an image and this logo or description, you have the word balloons that always existed, but now they have been used more because you're now bringing sort of the comic book story that is inside, you bring it to the cover. You just provide more information. You tease it a little bit more. And in those years, they were the covers, they were designed to make this sort of a very, attractive and intriguing. What's going to happen? No, Lois Lane is going to find out that Superman is Clark Kent because you see the rope. So there was this already a cliffhanger on the cover, right? And if we move 10 years ahead in the 1970s, um, we see there's a raise of price. You see that DC changed its corner logo to a DC Superman, so went back with the figure there. Um, and you see, if you compare the two imagery, while this was still sort of innocent, like this becomes a little bit more dark and a bit more, I would say, grounded on reality, even though it's a superhero comic, right? Um, but you still have the same sort of narrative. You still have the dialogues. You have copies, just telling the name of the story, what else you have in the story. There's a plus and everything, right? And in the 70s, they were very important in terms of comic books because it's when you had the direct market existing, and it sort of reflected a bit more the reality of the United States at that time, right? And this was very influenced by Marvel Comics that had come up in the 60s, in 1961, and sort of just pushed the sea to do more relatable stories to the characters. We go to 1981, and basically we see there's a little change in the logo in Action Comics. You have now Superman starring in Action Comics, and they went back and forth with this a lot. It was Superman's Action Comics, Superman in Action Comics starring Superman. So in the 1980s and 70s, you had this going back and forth, sort of trying to associate the name Action Comics to the name Superman, which was also, his second comic book, or his first comic book in a way, right? You see that the area above the logo is still being used to um, promote anything that is like inside the book, another backup story. Sometimes they use that for advertising. Sometimes they would just, just promoting other books or the slogans. But this is a part. The top third of the book is always something that is very, very, very important. And you see that starting in the 1970s, they started grouping together the information about the dates, the number, right? It's on the right side, right? In the 1970s book and in the 1980s book, it's inside a little box. So if you're looking to find out the price and the issue number and everything, you can find it more clearly. And there's a white rectangle on the bottom, more new pages from the new DC that we're going to be seeing in every further book. That this was the place where you would put the barcode, the price barcode, because when you moved from the newsstands to the comic shops, um, they were different. The prices that they would sell to the comic shops would be different than the price that they would actually deal with the newsstand, because with the newsstand they would consign, they would leave the comics there, and if they were sold, fine. But if not, the publisher had to take it back. With the comic shops, it's not like that. They buy it from the publisher with a very nice discount, but they cannot return them to the publish. So you had to have this differentiation. So the comic shop ones, they didn't have the barcode, right? Because it was a different price. And if we move to 1990, we're going to see that there's not much of different in terms of imagery. Sometimes you have now less words on the page. You rely a little bit more on um, on the visual. Let me just move this here a little bit. Right? You don't have word balloons, dialogues, or anything. You have the isle that time forgot, and a very exciting scene, a monster. Even though we don't see Superman fully in costume, this is Superman. We can, the red underwear above the white, the blue pants are uh, indicate this. And you see that now they're doing on the left side of the cover, they have the DC logo. Oh yeah, they had a new DC logo in the late 1970s. That was designed by Milton Glaser, the I Love New York designer. And now they put in this corner box, which was something that Marvel had done in the early 1960s. They put the issue number, the price, and an image. Again, you go back to have an avatar of a character, right, which is Superman. So you would see this in the newsstand if it's sideways or horizontally stacked. You would see this anyway. And above the logo you have now what they call it's a secondary logo. It's blackout too, and this is because they started doing this multi-part stories that would run from different titles. So Blackout 2 is the second chapter of a Blackout, which was an arc, right? That probably had Blackout 1 in another title in that month, and Blackout 3 and Blackout 4. Because if you look at the logo of the magazine, right, it's Superman in Action Comics, right? You changed, inverted the Superman story in Action Comics thing to Superman in Action Comics, right? You get, the Art Deco type below the Superman logo, which is big. And in the 90s, Superman had up to 5 different titles. It had Superman Action Comics, Superman, Man of Steel, Adventures of Superman, and the fifth one that would come out whenever the month had 5 weeks, because they would come. Each title would be in a week, right? Would be issued like weekly, the different titles. So in a month you had 4 or 5 Superman titles. So it was a time of Superman, right? So you notice that there's the comics code stamp seal is tiny now. It's getting smaller. And if you look below the little avatar figure of Superman, there's a triangle with the number 38. And this is because with all these titles, the Superman titles, you wouldn't know if you bought all of them or if you just bought a few of them, you wouldn't know what the right order to read. So this means that this is like the 38th chapter within the Superman storyline that had been going on within all within all these titles, right? So you had a issue number, but if you're following Superman stories, this is issue 38 that would continue in issue 39, maybe in Adventures of Superman, or maybe in Superman Man of Steel, right? Which would show whatever, Blackout 3. So 1991, we move to 2001, and we still see that Superman in Action Comics is a thing. It's still there. So the book's Superman in Action Comics. There was something that I forgot to mention in this one. On top of the barcode, the the little rectangle, you have credits for the authors of the stories inside. Because even though you do have signature of whoever drew the illustration on the cover, it was in early 1980s that you started giving credits to the authors of the story, to the writer, basically the writer, the penciler, and the inker. Colorists and letter would just come in much later, and a lot of books don't even do it nowadays. So um, we do have less words. You do have the choice, which is the logo for that. The little triangle that indicated the order of the book to be read, it's now become on the top right corner a little 45, on above, on top of the Superman, the S chevron, right? And if we move to November 2011, they reissued Action Comics #1, which means no, they didn't reissue. They launched a new #1. They finished the run. They had done that with Superman a few times before, and they decided to, just they did a big retcon on a lot of things. They just went back to Superman's oranges. It was like a reboot, like what you have, every 3 movies with Spider-Man. You have 3 movies Spider-Man, then you do a reboot and you start over. So that's what they did. And they started over with, a new Action Comics #1, which is a very good thing because it gets a lot of collectors into that. People say, oh, I can get a new Action Comics, or I can jump into the story at the point, right? And DC got a new logo. It actually has the last 10 years, it has like 3 or 4 different logos. And they have the new 52 slogan, which was a way to tell them to indicate that they just finished in this big reboot. They ended all their titles and they launched only 52 titles, one for each week of the year, roughly. And we see that the logo, Action Comics, it's always like a reference to the first one, and it has now Superman on top, and this doesn't change that much. and you see the credits of the guys down there. You now start having a little bit differentiation. You have just, sometimes you have the last names, sometimes you have first and for the full names, different typographic hierarchy. And this is something that it's this month, November to 2021. That's why I did November, because I knew I was going to be doing this talk, and so I selected something, from all the 1 years. And we see here, and this is actually Superman's son, who is now Superman 2. You see the covers, they become cleaner. You have a new Action Comics logo, so Superman's a little bit diminished in the back, in just outline of the letter. Action follows that. It's very action. This is the work of a graphic design named Darren Robinson. You have the extra feature of the book, also featuring Tales of Metropolis, that now they're taking this shape, just um, the little type. And with, if you see very closely, you can see that there's the credits below Tales of Metropolis of the authors of that story. And you have a slogan, the goodbye, and the image. And on the right, on the left corner, you have the new DC logo, the issue number, a S chevron, which is say this is a Superman book, with obviously with Batman you have a bat and everything, and you have three last names below it, which are the authors, the writer, the penciler, and the inker. And this one doesn't have a barcode, but it has a different um, rectangle, which it tells the age, which it's I don't know, 13 plus, because this is the cover for the digital edition of the book. And in that cover, you don't need the price and you don't need the the barcode, because this is a digital file. So you have the information in a hypertext on the side. You click on it, and then you buy it. It's already in your credit card or whatever. So you don't have that. But the way that DC sells their comics digitally, it needs to have. They don't separate it, regarding age groups or age indications, right? So they need to have that in there. So this is something that takes place in the digital comics, which is a very, very big game, which is something that I'm really going into. But what I want to talk to you mostly about this um, is, if we go back to the November, to the new Action Comics #1 that was launched in November 2011. It was not the only cover it was issued on. They had three different covers, which they call variant covers. So they had this main one in the middle. They have another one that was also drew by Morales, the artist of the book, who had been doing Superman for a while. So he did two covers, right? And it's the same issue. It's the same content, but two different issues. And you had an extra issue, which sorry, you had an extra cover that was done by Jim Lee, which was the publisher of and an artist and a former artist of DC. So you had this variant covers, right? And not only that, because two of those covers, they were also offered in a more limited quantity in what they call sketch variants. So one had the inks that Bryant had done over Morales' work. The other one had the pencil that Jim Lee had done, right? So so now we have something that is really big in the comic book world, that it's, not gonna say it's saving the comic book economy at the moment, but it's been big on that. And which are the variant covers, right? And if you watched Loki, this is, so you are a variant, so what should you do? And what a variant comic book cover is a secondary option of a cover that is offered by publishers for the same comic book issue, um, without changing the content of the book. So you basically you have choices on how to, what cover you want in your collection, right? So if you're just, someone that eventually buys the books, you just pick whatever you think it's nice. But there's much more into this. So just when I'm going to be talking about variant covers, technically every little change that you have on a cover makes it a variant cover, right? It can be just this little information mentioning that this is the second printing after the first print, the first print run had sold out. You have just a little, you print it again, and you have a little information, second printing. Sometimes you had little changes inside because of some error or something, right? We can see here in these two Superman ones, you had a second printing, and the second printing here is, there's the number two, the Roman two, and the color logo, the color of the C logo from blue became black. And you have with the, the original Star Wars comics in 1970s, uh, you had different prices because they were sold in different prices in a few places, in a few cities in the United States. They were just testing this. Sometimes you have a reprint, sometimes you have a different distributor, sometimes they were sold to through a different store. So all of this are considered variant covers, right? And they are worth something in the eyes of collectors. But what I'm going to be talking about this is like when you really decided to make a distinct cover, like for example, when you have this, when you have the newsstand edition for Superman, and you have the direct edition of Superman number 123, um, which was just sold in comic shops, and it was printed with fluorescent light, glow in the dark. So if you turn off the lights, Superman. This is a electric Superman. Let's not go get into that. It's a horrible face that everybody wants to forget, like the Clone Saga. But anyway, so this makes it very different. It's not different like having a little two and changing the logo color, but it's having a different appearance. And this all started in 1986 with the mini-series Man of Steel. So back in 1986, they rebooted Superman. They changed again. They went back to his orange. They changed a little bit his orange, and they published a 6-issue miniseries. Um, and the first issue, and as you can see on the right side, they had a template. They had a layout that you would have this logo, the Man of Steel in written on the sides of the Superman chevron shield, and you have just an image on the background of something that is going on in the story, and you have a main character on the front and everything. So, but the first issue, they did for the comic shops, they did this very strong, very bold image of just Superman just ripping his shirt, which you see also on the first issue. But if you're gonna understand what the first issues of the newsstand copy says, it just says, okay, origin story. You have they got into Superman mythology, and they just show Krypton exploding, the rocket that sends the baby Kal-El to Earth is being there. So, and you have Clark Kent becoming Superman. So this says it's an origin story, right? We're going to delve into this. And if you go for the news, for the comic shop one, direct to market one, it's just bold. It's just saying Superman is here, right? So you do have this distinction. The art was done by John Byrne, who wrote and penciled the story with inks by Dick Giorgiano. But you do have this, you know, imagery very strong, right? And it sold a lot. It was the best-selling title of 1986. So what DC thought to say, okay, so there might be something there. You know, uh, we're selling a lot of these. We sold a lot of these things. What if we try to differentiate the newsstand issue to the direct market issue? So in 1987, they picked two books, Justice League number 3 and Firestorm number 61, and they did different covers for these books, right? That were sold in the newsstand and in the comic shops, different ones. So the direct market edition, it has the layout that they were using that day. You know, it's a more, it's a less in your face description of the imagery. It's the same logos, right? Except for the DC logo that became like Superman Comics, because according to their research, the newsstands, they would get children from 7 to 12 years old. So they said, okay, we can be a little bit more sophisticated with the art on the cover of the direct market edition of the comic shops, but we have to be, you know, a little bit more, you know, in your face with the other one. So you do have the characters, the superhero facing the reader, right? And they're telling the plot, right? Hang on, Batman, I'm coming. Don't forget me, Captain Marvel. You've got to save the world from nuclear destruction. So you're saying this is Batman, this is Captain Marvel. Oh, look, nuclear destruction. There's a nuclear power plant. So it's very there. And Firestorm, who most people are not really uh, familiar with, you say Typhoon wants revenge, and you see this guy with fire in his head, and there's an image and a hand and screaming and something, right? But on the newsstand edition, you have a guy in a hurricane, and you want revenge, Typhoon. Then, oh, then kill me if you can. So it's in your face. This is Typhoon. Look, this is the bad guy, and I'm Firestorm. I have fire in my head. So yeah. So, but this apparently didn't go anywhere because they didn't do anything regarding this. They just did the Superman comics for those two issues, and that was it. And and then you got the following year they issued the first Batman book, solo book since 1940. So they went with this the main cover, which was a painted cover, and they had so many orders that they decided to do this cover only with the logo. Um, every each week that they had new shippings, they said, okay, let's do this one in blue. Oh, this one we're gonna do in pink, and this one next, the third week we're gonna do in orange, because they said, okay, so you know people are gonna be receiving this. And actually, what they had is like most people wanted to have the entire set, so they bought the 5 issues, so they would have a complete set, even though it's the same story, right? And they didn't even care that this is not really, you know, Batman colors, you know, because what I think is like they were like trying to test the waters for the Rainbow Batman to be, you know, but it was much ahead of its time. So in 1990, guess what? New Spider-Man book. This one is just called Spider-Man. It's right there, first all new collector's item issue with art by Todd McFarlane, and he did one artwork for that, and they had different covers. They had first the newsstand edition and direct market edition, and you can just see the big difference is the price barcode, right, on the left side. And in the direct market and the newsstand, they also sold the book inside a plastic bag, so you could buy one to read and one to collect, so you wouldn't rip it or wouldn't destroy this. So this was like, oh, I have this in prestige shape, right? And they also did a silver and gold printed. You can see it's the same art, but they had this. They have silver inks and gold ink. And they also had direct markets and newsstand edition. The gold one was only sold at Walmart, but the polybagged one in the silver one, it was sold for $2 instead of $1.75. So they charged the 25 cents in for a plastic bag, right? That would have this, right? Just because it was there. So they were just testing the waters to see. Oh, and they also had the platinum edition that after they sold 1 million of these books, they printed up, one, there's silver and hardcover, harder paper, and no ads and some sketches on everything, but they didn't sell this, so there's no price. They gave it away to retailers, right? About 10,000 of them. And then next year, of course, you're going to have a new X-Men titles, 4 different interconnecting covers by Jim Lee. And so each one shipped in a different week. So week 1 you have the Beast, week 2 you have the Colossus, week 3 Wolverine, and week 4 Magneto, right? And on the 5th week you have a gatefold cover that costed more than 2 times what the other one cost, right? So far we had just little differences between the covers. I mean, they were all done by the same artists. They were sometimes just changing the logo, and they had different color schemes, but they were all directed to collectors. But then everything just went crazy in the 90s, in the 1990s, because you started having like this gimmick covers, like with glow in the dark fluorescent inks, limited edition fluorescent inks, 3D glasses, the same issue, or comics inside poly bags that you still have to this day, embossed and metallic foil hot stamps, chromium covers, sometimes in just small details of the image, sometimes in the logo in the image, sometimes the whole thing. And you have holograms for this, that's just little card with holograms. And you have sometimes smaller companies just joined into the 1990s, was good for that because comics were selling a lot, so they had variant covers that were full hologram covers. And you have lenticular printing, which is the little card that if you move, you can. I try to create this Spider-Man notion that he's moving, so different positions for that. And you had the newsstand edition, which didn't do anything. And you have also Superman, just a bigger card. You had die cuts, which is still being used to this day, with Wolverine again. And you have acetate covers that cover part of the image, again still used to this day. And if you just open, you might reveal something. So you have the newsstand edition, and then you have this more interactive one, right? And then in 1995 they decided to have 13 different covers by different artists, uh, for doing different genres, different styles, tributes to other artists, pop culture references for Jane 13 issue number 1. And why they do that? If you get the nowadays you have these are the top 5 superhero comic book issues with the most variant covers. So they had over 100 variant covers for Dark Knight 3, Batman 50, which was his wedding to Catwoman, and Spider-Man 666, the Spider-Man Island arc. And how do you create this? How do you come up with more than 100 variants? What they did in Dark Knight 3 is that they asked the artists, the artists were allowed to use not only images, not only scenes from the story, but from other books, especially the original Dark Knight miniseries, the 1986 one. So you have different takes on that. So then you're just having like repeating images done by different artists. And with Batman Wedding, they had variants of variants. So you do have a variant cover like Nick Derriton did of Batman and Selina Kyle on a church, and then you have a black and white version of that because there are people that like black and white copies, and you have the Virgin variant, which is everything just the image without the trade address, without the logo, the price, it's on the back cover, right? And then you have different possibilities, right? With digital art, you can have different backgrounds. You can have Batman and Catwoman, and then Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, and the pencil, the ink, the silver foil. You can have interconnecting covers. They are not gatefold; they are interconnecting covers that present characters without that. They're not even in the they're not even in the story itself. But Spider-Man was the fantastic with just 6 illustrated. What he did is like he customized um, the covers. So any store or any retailer, if they bought 500 copies to be sold in their stores, they could send their photo or their logo, and then they would be having this unique thing. And of course, you had people that bought, all of those 145 variants and paid a lot of money for that. Just say, oh, I have this, right? And if you get the last 30 years, the top best-selling single issue comic books in the United States, 8 of them had variant covers. The only 2 that didn't have variant covers was Fantastic Four and Batman books from 2002. They were sold, for 9 and 10 cents when the book would cost 2.50. So they were sold 20 times cheaper than the regular book. So of course they sold over 700,000 copies. And you do have a lot of variations, and I know that we're gonna finish this soon, so I'm gonna just rush a little bit. Nowadays, a big thing has been the blank variant covers, which was something that started in 1995 and was supposed for the buyer to draw their own book. But nowadays, what people do is that they get the artists to sketch or to sign, or you get a DC artist to draw on a Marvel book or to draw something. So it becomes sort of a fandom thing, kind of a connection with the speaker, with the artist. You have trade dress variant covers, which is Eric Larson does a lot with the Savage Dragon. So it's the same imagery and the same layout, but it changes the trade dress, the publisher logo, the price, the way the other information is presented, sometimes the colors of that too. And he actually recently did a Savage Dragon issue with an extra cover because Savage Dragon had joined a Canadian super team. And since we're talking about logos, last year Wonder Woman had her 750th issue with dozens of covers, and a lot of them were based on their logos. And we do have Tom Miller, which is a graphic designer that is actually doing the design for the X-Men books on Marvel, and he's been doing that, and he's been doing some variant covers that use no imagery, so just beautiful typography, beautiful shapes. And well, this is a little bit. I'm just gonna go over this a little bit. Oh, this is nice. Let me go back here. You do have themes, right? You do have campaigns, and sometimes now that, for example, Marvel is connected to Disney, whenever they're promoting Tron, the movie, you get uh, all the characters dressed as Tron, the logo in Tron typeface, even though inside you have nothing to do with that, but it's a variant cover. So people who like Tron can buy this or can collect, right? Um, you have John Tyler Christopher. It's a great graphic artist, and he does covers that look like, the toy. I forgot about the name. The toys, right? The action figure thing. But these are comic book covers, right? And you have Darren Robinson, whom I mentioned, that's been doing the Batman design, the Batman books design, and Superman. He used this is coming out now in November. He designed covers that sort of play into the video game vintage covers. And some of the variant covers, they become more famous than the original ones. I mean, like with the Man of Steel, the Umbrella Academy, and the Obama book, that when Obama was elected, no one remembers the original covers for this. And what we have in terms of conclusion is that variants, they changed a lot the comic book cover. You don't need to have the logo on top. You don't need to even have a logo. You don't need to have the characters. You don't need that are in that issue. You don't need to have an image. You don't, So it's a changing. It's a game changing advent. The variant cover. And thank you very much. I'm sorry that I had to run to rush at this. I hope you guys enjoyed.